At 3:17 a.m. on November 17, 1941, a German military supply train, designation Heeresnachschub 42, was thundering through the darkness of the Rhone Valley in occupied France. It was hauling 12 flatbed wagons of Panzer IV tanks and 10 boxcars of 88mm ammunition destined for the Eastern Front. The train was a fortress. Armored cars with anti-aircraft guns protected the front and rear. Armed SS guards rode in the brake vans. The track ahead had been swept for mines. The bridges were guarded. The German high command believed the train was invincible. But the threat wasn't on the tracks. It wasn't in the sky. It was on a shovel. Inside the locomotive's cab, the stoker, a tired, soot-covered German conscript, was working the rhythm of the journey. Scoop. Swing. Throw. He dug his shovel into the tinder's coal pile, lifted a heap of black, jagged rocks, and hurled them into the roaring mouth of the firebox. The firebox of a steam locomotive is a pressurized hell. Temperatures exceed 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. It is designed to boil water into steam, generating the massive pressure needed to pull 2,000 tons of steel. One of the lumps of coal on the stoker's shovel looked exactly like the others. It was black. It was irregular. It was dusty. But it wasn't carbon. It was painted steel filled with plastic explosive. The stoker threw it in. He closed the firebox door. 7 minutes later, the plastic explosive inside the fake casing reached its critical thermal threshold. It detonated. The explosion wasn't large enough to destroy the train from the outside. But inside the confined, pressurized vessel of the boiler, the physics were catastrophic. The blast shattered the high-pressure steam tubes. The boiler didn't just fail, it ruptured with the force of a bomb. A massive jet of superheated steam and boiling water exploded backward into the cab. The engineer and the stoker were boiled alive instantly. The locomotive's steel skin peeled back like a banana. The drive wheels locked. The 2,000-ton train, traveling at 50 miles per hour, slammed into the sudden braking force of its own dead engine. The momentum did the rest. The wagons jackknifed. The flatbeds carrying the panzers derailed, tumbling down the embankment. The ammunition cars crumpled and ignited. In 10 seconds, a strategic asset worth millions of Reichsmarks was reduced to a burning pile of scrap metal. And there was no evidence. No bomb crater on the tracks. No wires. No commandos seen running away. The evidence, the fake lump of coal, had vaporized itself in the act of destruction. To the German investigators who arrived the next morning, it looked like a mechanical failure. A boiler explosion caused by poor maintenance. They shot the maintenance crew for negligence. They didn't know they had been attacked by a piece of art. The problem facing the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, in 1941 was purely mathematical. Germany ran on coal. Coal powered the factories. Coal powered the ships. And most importantly, coal powered the Reichsbahn, the railway system that moved the Wehrmacht. The SOE had tried blowing up the tracks. It was inefficient. A destroyed rail line could be repaired by forced labor gangs in 6 hours. To stop the German war machine, you had to kill the locomotives. A steam locomotive was a complex, high-value machine. It took months to build. If you destroyed the engine, the train was useless. But getting a bomb onto a locomotive was suicidal. The rail yards were floodlit and patrolled by dogs. The engines were guarded 24/7. The British needed a way to get a bomb into the firebox without getting a man anywhere near the engine. They needed a Trojan horse. The solution came from Station 9, a top-secret research facility in a quiet English manor house called the Firs. This was the Department of Dirty Tricks. The engineers at Station 9 were not soldiers. They were craftsmen, chemists, and criminals. They operated on a simple philosophy, ungentlemanly warfare. They looked at the German supply chain. They realized that the coal tenders, the open wagons behind the engine, were filled at remote coaling stations. These stations were huge, unguarded piles of black rock. If you could hide a bomb in the pile, the Germans would do the work for you. They would load the bomb. They would carry it. And they would throw it into the fire. The challenge was visual camouflage. A German stoker handles thousands of lumps of coal a day. He knows the weight. He knows the texture. He knows the sound it makes when it hits the shovel. If the fake coal looked too smooth, too heavy, or too geometric, he would spot it. The engineers at Station 9 became sculptors. They obtained samples of German coal. Anthracite. Bituminous. They studied the fracture patterns. They studied the sheen. They took dead casings of cast metal and hollowed them out. They filled them with TNT or plastic explosive, PE. But the casing was too smooth. It looked like a manufactured object. So, they used a stupid trick. They coated the metal casings in glue and rolled them in actual coal dust and grit. They chipped the edges with hammers to create random, jagged fractures. They created a fuse that had no timer. A clockwork timer was too risky, it might explode in the coal pile before it was loaded. They needed a fuse that only activated when it hit the fire. They developed a detonator hidden deep inside the charge. It was chemically inert until it was exposed to heat. The result was the explosive coal. It looked like garbage. It felt like a rock. You could throw it against a wall, and it wouldn't explode. You could drop it, and it sounded like stone. But throw it into a fire, and it became a tank killer. The production was unauthorized by the traditional military establishment. The generals hated it. They called it terrorist equipment. They argued that using disguised explosives violated the rules of war. It blurred the line between combat and crime. The SOE didn't care. They weren't fighting a war of rules. They were fighting a war of survival. They produced thousands of these lumps. They painted them different colors to match the coal from different regions, dull gray for the Ruhr, shiny black for France. Now, they just had to get them into the tender of a German locomotive. They didn't need an army. They needed a ghost. A young French woman, codenamed Madeleine, was one of the first couriers. She wasn't a soldier. She was a cleaner who worked at a rail yard near Lyon. She carried her lunch in a woven bag. And at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a dirty rag, was a single lump of coal that weighed exactly the same as a hand grenade. She wasn't going to fight the guards. She was going to walk past them, climb onto a coal pile, and drop a rock. The illegal weapon was ready for deployment. The German rail network was about to suffer a series of catastrophic accidents that would baffle their engineers and paralyze their logistics. The logistics of getting the explosive coal from the secret English manor of Station 9 into the German supply chain relied entirely on the SOE agents, the ghosts and civilians who moved invisibly through occupied Europe. The mission was built not on brute force, but on the precise exploitation of human habit and complacency. The primary target was the coal tender, the open-top wagon immediately behind the locomotive. Every time a military train stopped at a fueling depot, a small number of German or conscripted workers would refill the tender using a large crane or, more commonly, by hand. The workers moved quickly, it was tedious, back-breaking labor. They were trained to notice large objects or foreign material, a bomb, a sign of sabotage. They were not trained to spot coal that looked like coal. The SOE agents, usually local resistance fighters or couriers, were tasked with two specific, crucial roles. Role 1, the dropper. This agent had the lowest risk job. They infiltrated the coaling stations, massive, unguarded piles of black coal near the rail yards. They simply took their prepackaged, explosive lumps and dropped them onto the pile. They never aimed for a specific train, they just contaminated the supply. This was low volume but low risk, ensuring a steady, random distribution. Role 2, the packer, the real risk. This was the high-value, high-risk job. This agent had to place the explosive coal directly into the tender of a high-priority train, a known troop or ammunition transport. Consider the agent Madeleine, the cleaner in the Lyon rail yard. She carried her explosive lump, wrapped in a rag, in her lunch bag. She would wait for a strategic moment, perhaps during the shift change or when an air raid alarm forced the guards to take cover. She would approach the engine, which was often still warm and steaming. She was a cleaner, and German soldiers ignored cleaners. She was invisible. Her job was to clean the platform or sweep near the tracks. She would then climb onto the coal tender. A pile of coal is high and messy. She would quickly dig a shallow hole in the middle of the stack, place the single, valuable lump of explosive coal deep inside, and carefully cover it with real coal dust. The location was key, placing it near the top risked its being thrown out by vibration. Placing it too deep risked it never being loaded. The ideal spot was just deep enough to be scooped up by the stoker 30 to 45 minutes into the journey. The German system, built on rigid adherence to routine, was their downfall. The stoker trusted the coal. He trusted the process. His mind was focused on the heat, the steam, and the next stretch of track. He never once considered that the solution to his fuel problem was also the solution to his life. The detonation was an exercise in self-destruction. The initial explosion, the plastic charge, was small, roughly equivalent to 2 sticks of dynamite. It was designed only to breach the inner wall of the boiler. But when the inner wall was breached, the external physics took over. Superheated water and steam, under immense pressure, instantaneously converted into a massive gas expansion. The pressure blew the outer shell of the locomotive apart. The immediate destruction of the cab and the boiler had a secondary, strategic effect: psychological warfare. When German investigators ruled the first 10 derailments as boiler failure, no one suspected a weapon. They blamed poor steel, bad coal, and incompetent maintenance crews. The response of the High Command was predictable: they executed the foremen and engineers at the maintenance depots for sabotage. This created 2 critical advantages for the Allies. Denial: the Germans were looking for the wrong kind of enemy. They searched for craters and timers, not for meticulously painted rocks. Chaos: the executions terrorized the logistics staff, leading to worse morale, rushed repairs, and more genuine accidents, compounding the chaos caused by the SOE. The enemy was turning on itself. The success of the exploding coal was immediate and startling. In the winter of 1941 to 1942, the German High Command was baffled by the sudden, inexplicable spike in accidents on key supply routes to the east. Critical trains were being delayed or destroyed. Ammunition was lost. Reinforcements were late. The SOE, operating on a minuscule budget and using materials that looked like garbage, was achieving more than entire squadrons of bombers. The brilliance was that the act of sabotage was committed by the enemy themselves. The stoker was the unwitting assassin. The German High Command was the accidental executioner of its own repair staff. The operation was a masterclass in ungentlemanly warfare. It was cheap, deniable, and devastatingly effective. But such success could not remain secret forever. The Germans were desperate. They knew that something unseen was killing their most vital assets. The manhunt was about to begin. The fate of the entire SOE network, and the man who invented the fake coal, rested on whether they could spot the one subtle flaw in the perfect camouflage. By the spring of 1942, the statistical anomaly on the German railway network could no longer be ignored. The sudden, inexplicable wave of boiler failures was crippling logistics on the Eastern Front. Critical troop transports were being destroyed. Ammunition was lost. The German High Command, relying on initial reports, had blamed sabotage on local maintenance crews. The executions of innocent German foremen and engineers, ordered by the SS, were cruel but predictable. But one man refused to accept the official lie. Obersturmbannführer Klaus Meyer, a former mechanical engineer attached to the Reichsbahn security office, was tasked with analyzing the wreckage. Klaus Meyer was a cold, meticulous man who trusted only material science. He knew boilers fail due to metallurgy or pressure, not consistently at random points across the entire occupied territory. Meyer traveled to the derailment sites. He ignored the bodies and the official reports. He focused on the physical evidence of the destruction. Meyer realized the explosion pattern was fundamentally wrong. A true boiler failure results in a predictable, linear rupture. These explosions were too focused, too centralized, originating from the inside of the firebox, propagating outward. The energy signature was not steam, it was chemical. He began sifting through the charred wreckage. He ignored the twisted steel. He concentrated on the microscopic residue. In the remnants of a shattered coal tender near Lyon, Meyer found it, a small, dark, non-metallic residue that was inconsistent with carbon. It was a binder, the synthetic glue used to hold the explosive coal together. The perfect camouflage had a single, subtle flaw. Meyer's deduction was brutal and immediate: the British are using the coal itself as a weapon. He realized the genius of the deception. The British were making the German logistics system destroy itself. It was the ultimate psychological warfare. Meyer immediately bypassed the local SS, who were still executing foremen, and delivered his finding to the Abwehr in Berlin. The German High Command was initially furious at the suggestion they had been tricked by painted rocks. But Meyer's evidence was undeniable. The blast pattern was a mirror image of the binder residue. The Germans initiated a massive, classified counter-operation, Operation Kugelblitz, Ball Lightning. The goal was simple: find the fake coal before it entered the firebox. Meyer ordered the immediate inspection of all coal supplies near the front. The inspection was procedural and designed to counter the psychological trick. He ordered the deployment of massive electromagnets and X-ray scanning equipment at coaling stations, equipment designed to detect metal fuses or foreign objects, which the SOE's early models still used. The trap was now reversed. The German High Command was now actively hunting for the single flaw in the enemy's camouflage. Back at SOE headquarters in London, the intelligence was terrifying. They intercepted Meyer's classified orders. The British knew the precise time and location of the new German inspection centers. Their time was measured in hours. A specific coded alert was broadcast over the BBC, a sequence of musical notes, a lost dog announcement, or a dedication to a fictional relative. The message was simple: retrieve and discontinue. The agents had to find the planted coal before the Germans found it. This was the highest risk moment of the entire operation. Consider Antoine, the resistance fighter who handled the drop-offs near the rail yard in Lille. He had contaminated a major coal pile just 3 days earlier. He knew the German inspection team was arriving at dawn. Antoine could not simply call. He could not send a message. He had to physically go back to the coaling station, a heavily guarded area, and retrieve the 20 crucial lumps of explosive coal he had planted. He slipped into the rail yard at 2 a.m. The entire area was floodlit. German guards patrolled the perimeter. The risk was absolute. He located the massive black pile. He began frantically digging with a small, portable magnet, hoping to find the tiny metallic detonators he had planted. He found 18 lumps. He found 19. He found 20. He placed them in a burlap sack. He turned to leave. But Meyer's inspection team had arrived early. A half-dozen SS soldiers, accompanied by a civilian engineer carrying a portable X-ray unit, were already climbing the ramp to the coaling station. Antoine was trapped. The only path to safety meant walking directly past the German team. If the engineer saw the sack of coal and asked why a cleaner was stealing their fuel, the game was up. The lives of hundreds of agents depended on his next move. He did not run. He did not hide. He adopted the most effective camouflage possible: boredom. Antoine walked directly toward the team, whistling a cheerful French tune, carrying the sack of lethal evidence over his shoulder. He had one chance to walk through the enemy's statistical blind spot. Antoine walked directly toward the German inspection team. He did not slow down. He did not salute. He whistled his cheerful tune, carrying a burlap sack filled with 20 explosive lumps over his shoulder. Obersturmbannführer Klaus Meyer, the meticulous engineer who had uncovered the deception, was standing at the base of the ramp, arguing with an SS sergeant about the placement of the portable X-ray unit. Meyer was entirely focused on the coal pile itself, the statistical source of the problem. He glanced at Antoine. He saw a cleaner. He saw a low-status French conscript carrying garbage. He saw a neutral variable. Meyer did not ask to search the sack. He did not ask for papers. His brilliant mind, focused on the technology of the counterfeit, dismissed the human element of the operation. Antoine walked directly past the most dangerous man in the Reichsbahn security office, carrying the evidence of war crimes. The perfect bluff succeeded because Meyer suffered from the same statistical contempt as the stokers. He was looking for a sophisticated enemy at the top of the supply chain, not a cleaner at the bottom. Antoine escaped the rail yard. He delivered the recovered explosive coal to a safe house. The German counter-operation, Operation Kugelblitz, ultimately succeeded. Meyer's team worked for a week, using magnets and X-ray plates. They found and neutralized the remaining contaminated coal, eliminating the immediate threat to the German rail lines. The operational window for explosive coal was closed. The weapon had been compromised by the discovery of its secret. The SOE immediately retired the explosive coal program. It was deemed too risky. The success was noted, but the danger of escalating the war into full-blown terrorist sabotage was too high for official support. The program was effectively classified as ungentlemanly and unsuited for professional forces. After the liberation of France, Antoine, the cleaner, was never publicly credited. His service was absorbed into the vast, anonymous effort of the French resistance. Like so many SOE agents, he was rewarded with silence and the promise of treason if he ever spoke of the secret. The true injustice occurred in the archives. The official history of the SOE and the war against the German rail network focused on large-scale attacks, the destruction of bridges and viaducts. The simple, genius trick of the explosive coal was marginalized. It was too simple, too cheap, and too much of an embarrassment to the German engineers who had failed to spot it. Captain George Ream and the technicians at Station 9 received no public recognition. Their designs, the meticulously crafted simulacra of everyday objects, were often destroyed or placed in deep archives, forgotten by the generals who valued high-tech artillery over low-tech deceit. The truth of the explosive coal lay dormant for 50 years, catalogued under auxiliary sabotage devices. In the late 1990s, when classified SOE files were opened, military historians finally found the technical diagrams and the production reports. They were stunned. The logistics of the operation were simple, but the psychology was masterful. The statistical impact was undeniable. The explosive coal caused a massive spike in German locomotive losses during the critical phase of the Russian campaign. It was confirmed that the British, operating on a minuscule budget, were achieving more by making the Germans destroy themselves than by conventional bombing. The realization was final: the most dangerous weapon of the sabotage war was not the one the enemy paid to protect. It was the one they paid to load into their own firebox. The ultimate victory of the explosive coal was proving that the perfect camouflage is often the most mundane object. You don't need a massive, armored tank to defeat the enemy's logistics. You just need a lump of painted stone and the contempt of a military mind for a civilian object. Antoine, the cleaner, survived the war. He returned to his quiet life. He carried his secret until his death. But the history books now contain the truth. The war machine of the Third Reich was brought to a statistical halt not by heroic charges, but by the smallest, most perfect, and most criminal piece of industrial mimicry ever conceived. And the man who designed the bomb that only the stoker could set off was a genius lost to the annals of history.